allow me to now introduce the moderator for session 1, which will be looking at green minerals for the global transition, driving economic growth, inclusion, and community safety. And this discussion will be steered by Sarang Shidore from the Global South Program, Quincy Institute. A round of applause as she comes on stage and introduces her panel.
Good morning to all of you. Hope you've had a good night's rest and a good breakfast. The advantage of these early sessions is that everybody is all energized and ready to engage. So I hope you have lots of questions because we're going to have some time for Q&A later on so that you can participate. But I'm Sarang Shidore. I'm the director of the Global South Program at the Quincy Institute in Washington, D.C. We are a foreign policy think tank. And this morning's panel is titled, as you know, Green Minerals for Global Transition, Driving Economic Growth, Inclusion, and Community Safety. So let me first set the stage with a little bit of a background. Let's zoom out a bit and understand where we are, not just on this topic, but on the context. We are in a different world, as I think some other folks have mentioned earlier. We are no longer in the world of the 90s or the world of the noughties, a time when we had multilateralism as a core idea that animated many conversations and actions. Of course, the process starts at the end of World War II in a more enthusiastic way, but then more recently, we've had many reasons why multilateralism has come under pressure. Obviously, it's still alive. We are all here. But fundamentally, new trends are emerging that have relevance to this topic that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes. What I would say is that multilateralism is being supplanted, perhaps, or certainly complemented by the trend of asymmetric bilateralism, where conversations are had more one-on-one, deals are struck more one-on-one, or perhaps in smaller groups. And in this dynamic, we lose something because the inherent nature of the power equation is different in many of these bilateral conversations, and they may lead to short-term gains for one or few of the actors, but in the long run, all of us will face greater challenges, given that certain global challenges can only have multilaterally oriented solutions. So, and in this dynamic, of course, the Global South is under pressure. And this is the fourth G20 hosted by Global South country, South Africa. In the last 3 or 4 years have had a substantial focus on Global South issues. So, few areas are more illustrative of this dynamic I just mentioned, the sort of broader global context, than the critical minerals area. The famous tragedy of the commons has been well argued and analyzed in the literature. But as we move into the next stage of the energy transition, we are moving very much into transport already. We may move big time into industrials a bit down the road. Critical minerals has really become a center stage topic in all capitals, not just the Global South or parts of the Global North. But it turns out that many of these producing countries lie in the Global South. In fact, most of the big ones lie in the Global South. If you look at the list, there are, of course, the Australias and the Canadas and the Chinas, but then you have a whole host of other countries in the Global South that extend all the way from Chile. Certainly Africa is at the heart of it, with many, many countries, including South Africa, and then in Southeast Asia as well. So the extraction happens in the Global South substantially or predominantly. The processing happens, however, in the global north or China. And many of the companies that are involved in the extraction are located, again, in the global north and China. So the central challenge we are going to discuss today, and that's derived from South Africa's framing of the G20 broadly, is to how do we create a model of utilization of these minerals that's not purely extractive, that's not purely one-sided, that's not asymmetric, but is also inclusive, and creates pathways for development of global south countries. Many of these countries want to use their resources to go up the value chain, to become industrialized, to become upper middle income or indeed wealthy societies. And at the same time, of course, the consumer countries, which also include global south countries, but substantially more global north countries at this time, want supply security, understandably as well. So we have this balancing these two dynamics, and it's doubly difficult today because of what I just mentioned and what's been mentioned during the last day, which is fragmentation, geopolitical pressures, and competition. So with this said, let me open the floor to our wonderful panelists. We have 4 excellent panelists here who are going to engage with us, and hopefully we'll draw you into the conversation as well. So please. So I'm joined now by 4 wonderful colleagues of mine who are going to tell you all about these questions. And I'm going to hopefully steer this conversation. We have Igor Makarov, who was the head of the School of World Economy at the HSU University in Moscow. We have Judy Hofmeyr, who's Senior Fellow, Minerals and Development, Africa Policy Research Institute. Then we also have Claude Kabemba, who is the Executive Director at Southern Africa Resources Watch. And last but not the least, we have Madet Kittor, who leads the mineral sector portfolio at the UN Economic Commission for Africa and was formerly Interim Director of African Minerals Development Center, AMDC, in Addis Ababa. So welcome to all of you, and look forward to a fantastic conversation today. Let me start off with you, Igor. You know, we talk about critical minerals, we talk about green minerals. These are terminologies that are very much present, very much at the center stage of our conversations. But we all know that terminology conveys things, and sometimes it also obscures things. Sometimes it has subtle meanings. So can you unpack for us what critical minerals really means for you as you look at the whole spectrum of issues?
Thanks, Sarang. You're absolutely right that terminology matters. And in this particular case, in the case of critical minerals, in the case of green metals, the talk about terminology is about, to some extent, the talk about decolonizing of our mind. What is criticality? So there are about 30, and even more than 30 lists of critical metals and minerals in different jurisdictions. And in general, critical metals or critical minerals are metals and minerals which are first economically important for any particular country, and second, they are difficult to substitute. But for whom these metals and minerals are critical? They are critical for importers, first of all. Yeah, but for African countries, actually, absolutely different materials are critical. Fertilizers for agriculture, salt for food preservation, cement for construction, chlorine for water purification, so on and so forth. So not lithium and cobalt and nickel and rare earth elements and so on. For importers, critical mineral security is about access. For exporters, critical mineral security is about the opportunity to convert money into the base for the long-term economic development. And it is very important to separate these two narratives. Now let's talk a little bit about green metals and green minerals. Again, this is a term which reflects to the large extent the narrative of the global north. So first of all, we should understand that not all the critical metals and minerals are green. So if you look at the list of critical metals and minerals of the European Union, for example, you will see that it is not only lithium or nickel or cobalt or copper and so on, but it is also, for example, beryllium, which is used in missile guidance systems. It is also, for example, tantalum, which is used in electronics and capacitors and so on. It is also, surprise, coking coal, which is as far from the green transition as it may be only imagined. And Donald Trump, of course, he searches for rare earth elements all over the world, from Greenland to Democratic Republic of Congo, not because he is a fan of green transition. Secondly, so when we say green, even for metals which may be considered green, we usually mean that they are used in technologies which reduce pollution, right, and which reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But again, these effects appear in developed countries, while many countries of the global south has even no access to these technologies which reduce this pollution and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But instead, they have massive environmental degradation related to the extraction of these metals and minerals. So we have the situation when the green developments appears in one part of the world at the expense to the other part of the world. And actually, it is another iteration of pollution-having practices, which we actually have in the other form starting from 1980s and further. It doesn't mean, of course, that critical metals and minerals should not be produced and extracted in the countries of the global south. Of course, they should, but it just reminds us that it is very important to be strategic here and not share the wrong narratives which are developed by actually actors whose aim is to maximize the volume of these metals on the global market, but not the value added which remain in the country where these metals are produced. So I'll stop here.
Thanks, Igor. That was a very important opening because kind of going behind the terminologies, understanding the different interests involved, and indeed the narratives involved. And we all know that narratives matter. And sometimes the narratives are actually set standards and define visions. And from that perspective, we have, I'm going to turn to Marit now, who's sitting in the far end there. So just about able to see her. But Marit, can you share with us what the African Union has been doing in terms of its own narrative and vision? There's been the Africa Mining Vision. There's, of course, been, you define a vision is very important, but then there's the next step, which is implementing the vision, making things happen on the ground. So tell us a little bit about how this process is going on at the moment in Africa, and how is it translating into regional value creation?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very relevant and timely session. As was said, opportunity is here. There's a rush to these minerals, and I'm happy that you call them green in this session, because we've been talking about this for the last 16 years in Africa, at least 16 years. The Africa Mining Vision was developed by Africans and approved by heads of states in 2009, 16 years ago, because back then there was another commodities boom, and it was the realization that Africans were not benefiting from the exploitation of minerals that this vision was set up 16 years ago. It looks at the minerals value chain from the whole value chain perspective, from policies to regulatory frameworks to fiscal regimes, but the thrust of the AMV is that it actually focuses on linkages, value addition, resource-based industrialization, because that's where value is created. If you export raw, you export jobs, you export skills, you export technology, nothing really stays on the continent. And at that time in 2009, it was not, nowadays it's mainstream to talk about industrialization and value addition with the minerals, but at that time, it was really not mainstream. So we are happy that now, after 16 years, because of this minerals rush and this decarbonization commitments and also technology shifts and a lot of other dynamics, minerals have become the center. And again, it's geopolitically contested, but also it has become the oil of this. So we are already prepared in terms of vision. But we also have the African Green Mineral Strategy that we had approved this year in 2025 in February by the African Union Executive Council. So the definition, and my colleague here was talking about the definition of green. For Africa, we decided to call them green because we have a clear definition. Green minerals are feedstocks into clean energy technologies, green industries, and into mining supply chains and equitable industrialization to serve Africa's needs. Our definition is mostly around the same critical minerals defined by the West, but we have added our own because we're trying to serve our narratives. It's not defense, it's about clean technology, and we don't have the vulnerability of supply. So we came up with more or less the same, but we have our own ones that we feel that are for our institutions, like titanium is part of our, because it's an input to hydropower, or iron and steel sometimes is not in the list, but we do have the lithium, manganese, graphite, cobalt, copper, the usual ones. And it's not a static list, it's a dynamic list that can go, we have identified those 15s, but it can go up. So basically, what the point is that we have had visions. Now we have even focused. This Africa Green Mineral Strategy goes beyond industrialization, but it also talks about energizing Africa, industrializing and energizing, because 600 million people are still in the dark in Africa. We couldn't call them energy transition minerals. Transitioning to what? Because we are still not transitioning. It's the energy transition for others. For us is access and also energizing Africa. So 16 years ago, I'm not going to say that it's all bloom and gloom. Most countries, especially the ones that are producing, are high producers of minerals, 20 most producing countries have reformed their policies, have had policies to make it more equitable, local content policies, regulatory frameworks. Even the fiscal regimes are now much more aligned, so to speak. But going down the value chain, we still lag in terms of value addition, beneficiation, resource-based industrialization. And also we have to talk about the true measure is, has it really improved the lives of the citizens in Africa? Talking about local communities, talking about women, talking the artisanal small-scale miners. So we still have not gone there, but there are some improvements, but it's not there. So basically, we need to align policies, whether it's industrial policy, mining policy, local content. All the coherence policy is needed, not only at the national level, which is also a big issue, but also at the regional and sub-regional level. Talking about, we are here in South Africa, talk about the Southern Africa Development Community, SADC region, harmonizing policies, because it's really what we have to talk about scale. If you are just one country and trying to get everything done in one country, you will not have the scale, you will not have, even to attract investment, it needs to be at scale. So we need to harmonize our policies, whether coherence policies nationally, regionally, you need to have harmonizing policies. And the Africa Mining Vision has gone down to some of the regions. There is a SADC regional mining vision, but it's not teething. And it really needs to be teased out, because harmonizing policies would avoid the race to the bottom where investors are trying where the fiscal, which one is tax incentive is better than the other one. That's really not. As Africa, we really need to come up with. And the second other aspect is that really use smart policy tools to attract investment. be smart about it. Maybe not ban everything, export ban, which is okay for some, but don't have like this. You have to be smart, limited in time. You have to have a roadmap. You need to know very smartly why you want to get, if you do tax bans, why you should do that. It shouldn't be a one-off, but it has to be used very smartly. Harmonized regulations, I think I've said that. And then really, really biggest is about investment in skills and research and development. I think that's the lagging. I mean, the AMV has it, the Africa Green Mineral Strategy has it, and really, otherwise it becomes pipe dream. If you do not invest in skills, research and development, innovation, have centers of excellence. And that's how the industrial ecosystem gets. And also, of course, funding, but I will not go much into the funding. The Africa Green Mineral Strategy advocates for a venture capital fund that is being developed, but capital is, as you know, this sector is very capital intensive, and we should also look for domestic investors, not only look for investors, but we do realize that it's very capitalist, and it has to be dealt with in a manner that is. But infrastructure is also needed, energy, all of this. But you really need to have a plan and to see. And the Africa Green Mineral Strategy really shows you, if you want to go A, B, D, to see what do you need, what kind of energy, infrastructure, skills, capital is needed. And then, of course, it's up to deliberate policies, deliberate smart tools, and committed leadership and good governance, that is. And also, if you want to have agency in Africa, because that's also lagging, we can't be one country negotiating with the EU, with the 27 countries or others. We really need to have agency, like have an African bargaining power. And that can only be done if it doesn't have to be, we have 54 countries in Africa. It doesn't, but maybe like 2-3 countries that can pull the others and then that's what we believe that is lacking in the G20, in elsewhere, in the COP, in everywhere. It's like, we don't have to have a united voice, but unified or common somewhere, because we can't agree on everything as 50, we are different countries. So that's where we're heading. So I'll end here for now. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that covered a lot of ground. I think the African experience is very important to us at the G20 because, of course, the G20 is also involved in setting out high-level principles on critical minerals, and these regional experiences can be very important for taking or scaling up to the global level. So thank you, Merit, for sharing that. I wanted to kind of connect what you had said earlier about the darkness of certain communities in Africa in terms of electricity, that there are still, did you say 600 million, if I heard you right, Africans who do not have regular, stable supplies of electricity. And in this day and age, that should not be the case. And the fact that we have so many of the minerals that are driving the energy transition makes this an urgent challenge for the G20 and the world and Africa, of course. So connecting back to local communities, and I want to bring in Claude now into the conversation, because of course we are talking about the asymmetry, north-south conversations, and there's an asymmetry there. But there's also the fact that there are certain communities within the nation, in any nation, that are not as represented, or let's say do not have as much clout in the conversation when they speak to other actors in the society. So how can we sort of, taking this 1 or 2 levels down below the global level, how can we ensure that green minerals extraction does not reproduce the same patterns that we have seen historically in mining, which is exclusion of women, of artisanal miners, of indigenous communities, and in general local communities. What is your experience in the work you're doing? Tell us about that. Claude.
No, thank you very much. I've had an opportunity to visit over 40 mining communities across the continent, from Boke mine in Guinea to Bikita mine in Zimbabwe, and to many more. I've had a chance to visit most of the cobalt mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I've also had a chance really to crosscut, the Zambia mining sector. Even beyond critical mineral mines, I've also looked at other mines. I've been to Kao mines in Lesotho. I see Professor Kabele is here. I've visited your mines in Lesotho. And it has been a great opportunity to really look at the relationship between mining, people, or society, and the ecosystem within which mining extraction takes place. I have not found a mining community that is economically, socially, and environmentally viable. Most of these mining communities have, with various exceptions, have no running water, have no clean water. They rely on rivers. Most of these rivers are polluted by mine. They rely on borehole water. In many cases, there is no water in these boreholes because the mines suck most of the water. The forests on which they rely on for their cooking wood has been taken away by mining because mines continue to expand. With the expansion and the rush for these critical minerals, communities are being pushed away from their land. And all the trees and forests has been cut to give way to mining activities. So communities have been thrown away on land that is not Arab land. So they have a challenge for their livelihood. They can't even grow their crops. I've been in communities where kids have got no schools. They sit under the tree. But just 100 meters away from there, we've got some of the biggest mine in the world. I've seen mothers walking distance to go and fetch that polluted water to feed the families. So we have communities which give away their resources for for batteries for electrical cars, for solar panels, for wind turbine, but they remain in the chain of poverty. So, Chair, what I'm bringing here today is to say we need to find new frameworks for the green minerals. We must green value chains, but we must not break the chains in which these communities are in. So we will not change the situation if we continue to do the same thing and expect different results. So these are my proposition on how we can move out of this. One, I think we need to put people at the center of mining, of green mining, of energy transition. There cannot be justice if we have what I've just described. So, and not capital. For so long, on this continent, capital has been more important than people. And I think is the one thing we need to change. And for us to change that, we need to negotiate better. And negotiating better is in the hands of our leaders. The second thing I want to put on the table is that we need to strengthen our institutions, the state. Across the continent where we've visited, you find that most of our institutions are not in a state to really govern the sector. They either lack finances, they lack skills, they lack logistics. There are some mining ministries, they've got no capacity to go and monitor and enforce the rules. They depend on transport from a mining company to go and reach a mine. So I think the need for a functional state becomes critical. And in most cases, I think our mining ministries are not functional. The third one, I think, is we need to upgrade our regulations. Our regulations, most of the time, we've made progress in many countries, but we depend currently mostly on voluntary principles, which are international principles. They are good, but I don't think they are sufficient. So here, the complexities of the comparative analysis around the regime of responsibility and the regime of restraint becomes important.
Claude, let me ask you to hold that thought just for a minute, because I want to make sure I get the others in as well and some time for questions. We'll come back, though, to your very important points, and especially where you ended on regulation. But just for the moment, turning to you, Judy, I think what Claude said was very important, because he's really framing people to be at the center of all of this. We can talk at the global scale, we can talk at the national scale, but ultimately it's all about the people. And you have a unique experience on this panel. You have worked on mediation, you've worked on negotiation, and you have evolved this framework, or you've participated in evolving it, called negotiated justice regimes. So here we have, in a mining case, a very classic situation where there are multiple interests involved, where the interests of the nation state, the interests of corporations, there's a global interest also, the global north, other parts of the global south. Various components are at play. And naturally, there's going to be some friction, some differences. So what does your own work tell you about how we can resolve these differences so they don't become impasses? Because all of us want the supply to be reliable, we want the global south to benefit, all of the sides of the equation need to be addressed. So what does your experience tell us on this?
Yes, thank you. I completely agree with everything that Claude has said, and I want to explore those realities further through that question. So when we talk about governing Africa's mineral reserves as a lever for development, we need to begin by recognizing that this terrain has never been simple. It has always been shaped by overlapping interests, uneven power, and persistent tensions, as you've mentioned. So if anyone tells you the answers are simple, they're not. Be skeptical if anyone says that. And the same is true for this critical minerals debate. On the African continent, we have many ambitions when it comes to our critical mineral reserves. We want to leverage them for value addition. We want globally competitive manufacturing abilities built on these minerals. We want local ownership. We want meaningful participation of communities. We want human rights protection. And we want strong environmental safeguarding while we do all of this. And let me say from the outside that these ambitions are incredibly important, and we should not abandon a single one of them. But we need to keep in mind that in practice, each of these ideals contain some trade-offs, and they can't always be maximized at the same time under the same conditions. For instance, deep value addition often requires large investment, often foreign, and specialized skills. Securing that investment often puts pressure on how much leverage governments have to insist on local ownership, or value addition, or environmental protection. In other words, pursuing one ambition can narrow the room to pursue another. And I'm not saying this is the way it should be. I'm saying this is why we're seeing these realities, is the tension between these ambitions. And this necessitates that we continually prioritize, assess, and adapt, and get the most that we can, given a specific bargaining position that we're in. And that's why I think about mineral governance in Africa as a process of negotiating what is fair and what is possible. And there's often a gap between those two things. And I'm going to say a little bit more about this gap, especially within a fundamentally unjust and complex global economic system. So governments can set ambitious policies on value addition and ownership, but these ambitions do not always automatically determine what happens on the ground. Again, this is the frustration. We see the ambition and then we see the outcomes and they don't match up. Because behind closed doors, when they negotiate with investors and operators who bring the capital, there's a conflict between wooing that investment and regulating that investment, the carrot and the stick. And this is what we're seeing at the community level, outcome-wise. And this is where my PhD work has focused on what happens, apart from our ideals, what happens in the operational context. This is the level at which impacts are felt most directly. Jobs and procurement, dust and water, resettlement, safety, grievances, pollution. Yet it is also the level with the weakest protections. In some jurisdictions, yes, we've got some legal frameworks that recognizes that there should be consultation, but they're often, as Claude has said, poorly enforced or interpreted in ways that enables mines to do the bare minimum. So what happens again is day to day, deal to deal. We have ideals, but this is how it plays out in that negotiation. And the power asymmetries are huge, not only between African governments or governments in the global south and powerful governments that have stronger industrial capacity and influence elsewhere. But as we know, local communities are in the most precarious position of all. They have the least information, the least leverage, and the least capacity to influence major decisions. Yet they bear all of the social environmental costs of extraction. It concentrates on local people. Of all the interests that are moving around, there's only one party to this negotiation that bears all of the costs. And their exclusion is not accidental. It's built into the political economy of mining. Mining is only profitable because it is able to externalize costs. It is able to externalize waste to others, and that we have to recognize. But there is reason for hope. For our job as civil society and advocates, it's important to investigate that gap between what's fair and what's possible when it is based on real constraints and where there's actually more wiggle room than appears. Often, terms of extraction can be improved with better information. It's often as simple as that, with improved coordination, better capacity, and an underappreciated thing that we don't speak about enough is just creativity. Creatively thinking about what can we do in this space that's a little bit different and not sticking to a specific formula. And the second reason for hope is in the power of solidarity. Yes, there's power asymmetries, but it makes solidarity a non-negotiable. And that's why continental frameworks like the African Green Mineral Strategy and the Mining Vision is so important, because it gives states a basis to operationalize and mobilize that solidarity. And the same is true at a community level. Communities that are part of national or transnational networks supported by organizations like the Southern African Resource Watch, environmental groups, pro bono legal organizations have much more leverage. And again, that is where our work becomes really important. Solidarity doesn't erase power asymmetries, but it does reshape what happens at the negotiation table. It does raise the cost of neglecting environmental harms or neglecting social norms. And it's through that channel that I think that we can have a more principle-based governance framework for how we approach our green minerals and our mineral reserves in this very interesting transition phase that we're in.
Thanks, Judy. We are starting to run out of time, so not that I want I would love to continue this conversation. Maybe we can do a very quick round on one issue that always comes to my mind, which is all of the approaches that are being used to counter the extractive versus the producer country imbalance and to, at the same time, maintain supply security. Based on your own experiences, and maybe, Igor, you can start on this one, and then we can go with Merit and the others. What approaches, and we've had approaches like quotas, export bans, we've had part nationalization, we've had financial techniques or financial approaches to achieve this value addition in producer countries. Which of these approaches, if you look at all the cases that you are familiar with, which of these approaches has worked better? Or is there not one answer? Are these so context dependent that we can't really find a single pattern here? I'm hoping there is a pattern. But over to you, Igor, first, and then we can, just 1 minute, please, each, so that we can have the audience participate.
Yeah, thank you. I would probably list 4 best practices. First is, and probably the foremost, is to be strategic. Now the leader in production and especially processing new critical metals and minerals is China. But China's dominance, it did not come from nowhere. It came from very long-term strategic vision. In 1992, Deng Xiaoping said that Middle East has a lot of oil, China has a lot of rare earth, and we should develop it. So it is the first. Second, and also very important, and the Russian case also shows the importance of that, it should be the linkage to the domestic market. So we can't just extract minerals and send it to exports and expect that it would add value within the country, especially given that start exporting is very difficult in terms of competitiveness, again, with China, which has already a huge economies of scale. Linkage to the domestic market, it is what is absolutely necessary, and for this, of course, industrial policy is of the major importance in different forms, in the form of local content requirements, in the form of export bans, as Indonesia does with raw nickel, for example, and so on. Third is reframing resource extractive agreements and try to link them with the development of infrastructure, development of technologies, capacities, and actually access to those goods which are critical for this particular country, for African countries, for example, which I mentioned, like fertilizers, cement, and so on. And so I think that G20 in this particular case may actually help with framing the approach for, general approach, of course, template for these agreements. Yes, and fourth, last but not least, concerns partnerships. Partnerships between exporters. Yes, importers may say that it is cartelization, but for importers it is okay to create clubs of buyers of critical metals. Why is it not okay to create the clubs of sellers? And yes, this may help, and I think that it is a strategy which may be very efficient on the market of new metals and minerals. Thank you.
Thanks, Igor. Merit, do you want to come in with your AMDC experience?
Yes, definitely. As Judy and everyone else was saying, value addition is not, it's not easy. It's very complicated. But the Africa Green Mineral Strategy, as I said, really pulls it. Like, what do you need to get from A to B to C? And we have a concrete example in Africa, the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Zambia precursor plant. It started with a study that was done by Bloomberg, but it was commissioned by African institutions. And that study found that there's cost and emissions advantage to have a precursor plant, just NMC, nickel, manganese, cobalt, in the DRC. That was 2021. At that time, Bloomberg was saying that you can't go to the electric vehicle yet because you didn't have what is required. It was considered a pipe dream. right? But that study started the whole DRC precursor plant because when you have numbers there, because there's really costs. We knew about the emissions because usually, it goes for refining, it goes to China and it goes back again to other countries. So intuitively, you knew about the emissions, but the cost was what really set it apart, that you had an advantage of cost. You're not doing charity or it's the bottom line that you can do actually precursor plants in the DRC. And then it really looked at the whole value chain and what it takes. And the numbers were so compelling. You only get, if you don't do anything, you just export raw, you get back, and with all the illicit financial flows, the transfer pricing, all the leakages, you can still get 11 billion. But then you go up smelting, refining, you go to 44 billion. If you go to the precursor, 271 billion. And if you go up to the electric vehicle, 7 trillion. That's how you transform lives. It's that realization that prompted, at the highest level, Tshisekedi and the Zambia president back then to go for this DRC MOU, and now it's gone to pre-feasibility. Feasibility is coming, but it's not going at the pace that everybody would want it. Because again, off-takers, you need a lot of, after that you need off-takers. There's a risk perception, real, or sometimes the perception is more real than the risk. But with all those factors that you need, but you need also clarity in your regulation and policies, as I said before. That's on Africa, because you can't. You need policy clarity, convergent. You need to be coherent. So that's also can be one of the why off-takers are not rushing, or at least not in a responsible way, because there are so many other ways to come in. But that you have to get the policies right. We always look into also to see South-South, and Indonesia comes to mind. Indonesia has done well with their nickel. They have gone through, and they did have export bans, but it was very limited in scope, in time. It was judicious, and they had, of course, China as a neighbor, and China really, because they had the comparative advantage of the nickel. It didn't work for bauxite for them. It worked for the nickel. So we do have some examples, but we cannot do cut and pastes because every context is different. Sure. So that's why I was saying you need to have a roadmap. And then if you are a country, a small country, even DRC is small, because if you don't have your neighbors, you cannot, you have to talk about scale. You talk about, even as a market. If you're targeting electric vehicles, you have to also create the demand within Africa. Otherwise, the whole, it doesn't, you can't be fueling electric vehicles in Asia and Europe. Well, it's not, or maybe you go to the 2-3-wheelers. What makes sense for Africa? 2-3-wheelers are much more than you don't have the critical mass of middle class that can have EVs in the next, or you create that market. Otherwise, and to do that, you have to be coordinated as Africa and have, mineral corridors, maybe not SADC necessarily, but like corridors. This DRC Zambia is a good one. You have the Lobito corridor now with Angola at the center.
Yeah. So Barrett, hate to cut you off, but I want to make sure that others can weigh in, and yes, we'll come back to you during the Q&A for sure. So Claude and Judy, Barrett and Igor both made very interesting and important points. The Indonesia example is actually a really interesting one there, no question. DRC and others. But in your own work, when you look at the question of inclusion or finding these kind of locally negotiated deals that work, that are stable, are there some of the same principles that translate to your end of the spectrum in terms of policy stability and all the other things that were mentioned? Please, if you could keep your remarks brief, then we'll open it up for questions. I think we'll have about 10 minutes for questions. Claude, please.
Look, when we look at the DRC recently, its policy around quotas or export bans, they were more looking at how they control the market in terms of mineral production. And it's more focused on revenue collection. That's something which works because the DRC has got producer power when it comes to cobalt. But my sense is that it's important to be able to understand the market. What is it that we can be able to produce in relations comparatively to other countries? My sense is that when you look at the case of the Congo-Zambia electrical batteries production ambitions, is it the best in terms of our capacity to compete? When you look at China with a massive production, cheaper production of those goods, how is the study of market inform us of what we need? My sense is that we might be identifying the low-hanging fruits, where we should start slowly, knowing our weaknesses, but working on our comparative advantage. On the value chain, we need to identify where we can add value and be more relevant. And that, I think, the study that we need to invest in quite aggressively now, because my sense is that just to wake up and say we want to produce electrical cars, my sense is a little bit goes against the current need of the people. I think we need to be really framing our value addition to responding to the need of the people. And I think today our people need energy, and these critical minerals, adding value, could go in the sense of having energy storage capacity that can provide energy to remote communities. I think that will be far more beneficial. And I think Zambia and DRC have the capacity to quickly respond to that need than responding to the needs of batteries and electrical cars.
Thanks, Claude. Judy, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think of the levers that enables value addition. There's a lot that's been mentioned. There's also energy and all of that. But one that I really want to focus on is human capital. And I think if that is a massive priority for governments to invest in their own population skill level, but also the necessary technical skills that is required for very, very specialized manufactured projects. Like, that's a major lever. But it's also a role that our partners can play, just enabling access to education in anywhere in the world, whether that's in China or in Europe or in the US or wherever, or cross-border. There's a very special thing that happens if you are able to access the best education in your field. There's remittances that happens. There's skills that eventually come back. There's access to social networks, access to capital networks that people, especially young people, can bring back and then plow into industries. It's also young people that can then go into government and bring more capacity to government. So there's this really beautiful, often underappreciated thing if we just focus on not only domestic education, but just access to education more generally. And we're seeing, for instance, in South Africa, in some mining areas, mining companies are really investing in enabling affected people to access better education opportunities, to obtain specialized mining skills and jobs. And it's also in the company's interest to make sure that there's that pipeline, but from locally affected people. And I think there's a lot of solutioning that we can do in that field.
Great. Well, we have not as much time as I was hoping for the audience questions, but we do have some time. So please, if you could raise your hands and ask your question. I have a gentleman right here we can start with. Maybe take 2 questions at a time and do 2 rounds. So the gentleman here, and then after that, the lady in the dark red or maroon back there.
Thank you, Sarang, and thanks a lot to all the panelists for this wonderful discussion. My name is Nanda Kumar. I am from the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, and we are based in Japan. Now, this is one of the topics which we have been working on, and we have actually tried to understand different aspects related to it. The current way the critical mineral value chain operates is highly unequal. In terms of feeding into energy transition, in the next 10 years, if you see what the current critical mineral value chain has been contributing to, you will only end up seeing energy transition happening in some pockets in the world, while most of the producing countries in the global south will continue to face all the negative aspects of it. Now, that brings me to the point of a need for benefit sharing and need to compensate the people and the society which are actually feeding into to this market.
Nanda, sorry to interrupt you, but could you get your question, just because I want to get as
Excellent.
many people as I
So
can.
now my point is that what kind of financial mechanism do you suggest? Or how can we think of garnering fund for a possible financial mechanism that could help benefit sharing and compensation? Thank you.
Thank you. And the lady at the back, second question.
Thank you. Great panel. I'm Erin McCandless, a professor of politics at UJ and director of the Qatar South Africa Center for Peace. And I'm curious on your reflections about the potential for critical mineral provisions being incorporated into peace agreements, and what, particularly in this context of a move towards increasingly transactional agreements and settlements, and perhaps just your reflections on the first most critical places to start with addressing this and reversing it towards better agreements. Thank you.
Anyone wants to take one or both of them on very quickly? Igor, please.
Actually, what you, Nandan, asked about, I partly tried to cover to my second contribution. That there are some mechanisms which may be integrated into agreements, into extractive agreements. First, linking them to the development of infrastructure, to the development of communities all around, and so on. And actually, it works sometimes. And some companies, they really not only extract minerals, but they develop communities and cities and infrastructure all around. And if it becomes the mainstream, so it becomes some sort of burden sharing mechanism on the one hand. On the other hand, what is also important is, of course, development of standards of green and responsible mining. That is another mechanism. The policies that we discussed very widely within this session, including local content requirements, is another attempt to share the burden and to make the interaction between exporters and importers, or between domestic country and the extraction companies more fair. So I think that there is no one particular mechanism, but the combination of all this moves us to the right direction. It is probably not the final and the whole response, but what we have now is using all these mechanisms all together.
Anyone wants to come in for 30 seconds only, because we are out of time, I've been told, so we got to leave soon. So 30 seconds, Merit?
Yeah, for the second question, which was on the peace agreements, which, I mean, especially some countries have become very transactional, and then when a country is in conflict, I can cite Ukraine, for example, how the deal was made with Ukraine. But interestingly, the second deal that the Ukraine made, they really went and negotiated fairly good under the circumstances, because they really talked about sovereignty. They knew what they had the geological base, they knew what the offer was, and they negotiated sovereign wealth fund, even reconstruction and everything else. I know this because I wrote an article about it and what Africa can learn from it. And the ones that we are, like this vision that we have, and again, the Africa Green Mineral Strategy gives you a roadmap on how even to negotiate contracts. And there are some institutions that are there to help countries negotiate fair and good contracts, the Africa Legal Support Facility and others that do it for free. But Sometimes we're not that organized that we do not use those, and then we go into these deals. But what the point I'm trying to make is, it's true that when you are vulnerable when you are in conflict and you have other considerations, but there are some frameworks that are clearly aligned that will tell you how the sovereign do not lose the sovereignty, do not lose, at least negotiate some kind of sovereign wealth fund, or at least some kind of reconstruction fund that comes back. And just like Ukraine did. I mean, they negotiated even how they didn't their sovereignty remains the same, and you can really make sure that even though you are in a vulnerable state, that you can. But again, agency, one country with one big doesn't work. There's the asymmetry of power, asymmetry of bargain. You really need to have that kind of agency, and those contracts have to be transparent, which most of the time are not. But we're getting there.
Thank you, Merit.
Yes.
Hate to cut you off again. I don't think we have time for any more interventions. Very sadly, we could continue talking about this for another hour. But I think on the theme of agency that Merit mentioned, and all of the themes that have come out from the speakers, I think speak to this very important issue. The conversation continues. Thank you to all of you and the audience for your participation. And until next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.